Hey y'all, and welcome to Politibrawl. My name is Brian, and Mike Waltz goes toe-to-toe with Dana Bash and has to remind her that Zelensky may not be the right man to lead Ukraine anymore because of how terribly he handled the situation back in the White House the other day. Let's dive in.
We were ready to sign that deal. I want to address directly that this was some type of ambush is absolutely false. We had negotiated the minerals deal in the weeks prior. It was difficult, but it was done and finalized and ready to be signed in the East Room.
So since you've been talking about his body language and his approach, I do want to ask about your view of Volodymyr Zelensky, because right after the Ukraine war happened, after Russia invaded Ukraine, to be more specific, you were on CNN and you called Zelensky a 21st century Churchill because of how he was leading the fight against Russian tyranny. And yesterday you called him, or at least you compared him to an ex-girlfriend who wants to argue everything that you said 9 years ago rather than moving forward. Is that really how you see it now? And do you see at all the perspective that he was trying to put out there, which is that he does not trust Vladimir Putin and he feels that he needs some kind of security guarantee?
Well, Donna, I would also point out, if we want to do a history lesson on Churchill, that he stood and fought for his people. President Zelensky stood and fought for Ukraine. But Churchill was also voted out of office in 1945. He was a man for a moment, but he did not then transition England into the next phase. And it's unclear whether President Zelensky, particularly after what we saw Friday, is ready to transition to Ukraine to an end to this war and to negotiate and have to compromise. Yeah. And what President Trump said right there that day in the Oval Office is both sides are going to compromise here. He's made that clear to both Vladimir Putin and Zelensky, but it did not appear to us that Zelensky was ready to go to peace. Yeah. So when he makes that clear to us, publicly and privately, that's the president is trying to end this war. He campaigned on it. He was elected on it. And that's going to take tough diplomacy. Who would criticize us? But you have members of Democrats that are criticizing us for dealing with the Russians, the same Democrats that had no problem dealing with the murderous Iranian regime in an Iran deal that was horrific and used the Russians as intermediaries.
I
think you got one of those senators coming on your show. So so I'm finding the kind of hypocritical pearl clutching in Washington, D.C. to be a bit ridiculous.
Can I just follow up on what you said about Winston Churchill? Because it is interesting. He was definitely a man for the moment during World War II. Are you suggesting that President Trump wants Zelensky to resign?
We need a leader that can deal with us, eventually deal with the Russians, and end this war. And if it becomes apparent that President Zelensky's either personal motivations or political motivations are divergent from ending the fighting in his country, then I think we have a real issue on our hands. But look, Donna, let's ask ourselves, what is this war going to look like a year from now? The patience of the American people to keep giving billions and billions and billions with no end in sight is not unlimited. And we also made that clear to President Zelensky at the end of that meeting.
So you're saying he might
time on his side, is time on the American people's side. What I'm saying is this war needs to end, and that's going to take concessions on territory. That's going to take Russian concessions on security guarantees. That's going to take all sides coming to the table, and we are working very hard to drive those negotiations forward.
Zelensky and Churchill being compared in the same breath is a very interesting concept to me, because Winston Churchill was smart enough to know how to handle his allies. Okay, the United States, back when war broke out in 1939, and then once Germany had swept through France and had trapped the British troops at Dunkirk, Winston Churchill was desperate for any kind of help. And so when he called the United States, he called up FDR to say, hey, can you help us in any way, shape, or form? Can you give us some boats? And FDR told him, simply put, that his hands were tied. He was not allowed by Congress to give him any extra help outside of the Lend-Lease Act. There was a clandestine way for them to get supplies over to them, but it required a team of horses to pull it over the Canadian border, get it to the St. Lawrence River, and then sail all the way over to the English Channel to Dunkirk. That wasn't going to work. And in that scene, in the movie Darkest Hour, you had Winston Churchill just go, well, that's a bit ridiculous, but thank you for trying. I know your hands are tied. We'll keep the line for negotiations open for later. And FDR simply said, I'm sorry, I wish I could actually help. I've been wanting to for a while. But at the time, the American people did not want to get involved in the recent wars that were going on one side of the Pacific and the other side of the Atlantic. It took us literally getting attacked out of nowhere for us to actually get involved in World War II. And compare that to Ukraine, compare that to Zelensky, who's not a diplomat, who hasn't really worked in government before, but he was the man to lead the people of Ukraine at its crisis moment when Russia, for no real good reason, granted, they were poked by the CIA, there was the 2014 revolution, and of course the United States was giving them weapons under both the Trump and Biden administrations. And so Russia felt threatened, and so they invaded foolishly, and they thought that they could push over Zelensky because Zelensky's an actor. He is not a diplomat. And we also saw that he isn't really experienced when it comes to diplomacy. And you'd think that he would have learned something over these past few years, but once he came to the White House, after about 30 minutes of a positive conversation, he then decides to poke the bear even further with Donald Trump, basically saying, y'all are isolated, y'all don't know what's really going on, I know more than you do. That's one thing you don't do when it comes to negotiation. You do not tell the person that is, by the way, giving you billions of dollars that I know more than you. Okay, Zelensky, a little pro tip here. When you are begging for someone else's money, when you are begging for help, you beg. Okay? You don't demand. You don't try to say that I'm the strong boy here, I'm the tough guy in this situation, and you are going to help me out. That's not going to work. And boy, did it backfire in his face. Even his translator was face-palming for the entire segment, for those last 11 minutes of that disastrous exchange. When Zelensky was trying to make demands of Donald Trump and even J.D. Vance, which, by the way, for the vice president to be in these sort of situations is very rare and unprecedented. It just speaks volumes to what Donald Trump thinks of J.D. Vance, which is why I'm a growing fan of this dude, because the moment that J.D. Vance had the opportunity, he simply reminded Zelensky that, Buster, we have a better military than you. We've given you everything that you've wanted. And if you're worried about corruption, it's on your side of the aisle. It's in your country. Let's be honest here. This president quite literally got impeached because he asked your country to look into the corruption of Hunter Biden and Burisma. Okay? So if you want to talk about corruption, if you want to talk about money, if you want to talk about weapons and supplies, the onus is on Zelensky to be calm, collected, pleasant, and workable because he's the one that needs our support. Europe isn't going to give him that support. Europe can't. Europe doesn't make the weapons. The United States does. Europe doesn't support the manpower. The United States does. Europe is deathly afraid of Russia, and they have always been terrified of the nation ever since the invention of the railroad. And instead of realizing that, why don't we just make Russia an ally and give them what they need and help them out? And instead, it's been this ridiculous clash of, there's a monster underneath our bed. Well, guess what? The monster's here. All right, the monster is finally here, and it's all because Europe has looked to the United States to be their sugar daddy for so long, and finally America has had enough. We are tired of being the world sugar daddy. We are tired of being the world policeman. We are tired of giving these people money without a second thought. It's time to completely rethink the way that we do negotiations with Ukraine. And Zelensky is no Churchill. Churchill had military experience. Churchill was a good diplomat. Churchill knew how to handle his own politics. Meanwhile, Zelensky might be getting impeached by his own people because the moment that exchange went down in the White House, There were MPs in their parliament that were starting to look into a vote of no confidence and a vote to impeach Zelensky because they knew that without American support, their western and southern fronts will collapse overnight. And there will be no more Ukraine. Okay, that's a sad thing because Ukrainians deserve their own country. They deserve their independence. Russia should not have claim to that nation. But because they need us, they should probably think about sending a better leader forward that's going to work with the United States to help procure a peace. And this peace is not going to look as nice as we want. It's going to take some major concessions. It's going to take both Putin and Ukraine to say, you know what, we've gone a little too far. Let's see if we can cut a deal. The United States will be that arbiter, and it won't happen unless Zelensky realizes his position and he comes back and apologizes. He's already done a 180 on the minerals deal, but it's time for him to apologize to the American people, and more importantly, apologize to both Donald Trump and J.D. Vance for being so ridiculous. Winston Churchill would have never done anything like this. So Waltz is completely right here. And of course, Dana Bash, thank you for not interrupting and being ridiculous here. Thank you for actually being a good journalist for the first time in the history of CNN. Folks, my name is Brian. Hope you enjoyed that segment here on Politbro. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Catch you on the next one. And until then, y'all have a good one.